today's episode of Unsolved Mysteries, we're going to be diving into a 9-year-old unsolved case from South Korea known as the Mungyeong Crucifixion. What's interesting about this case is that a taxi driver from South Korea was found crucified wearing a crown of thorns in a very remote area of Mungyeong quarry, only to be concluded as a suicide by the police. So, who was this man that was found crucified? Why was he crucified? Also, was there any foul play or an accomplice involved in this particular case? These are questions that still need answers, but let's dive deep into the clues of this case to come up with our own theories and speculations. Let's get into this case now. On May 2nd, 2011, in a remote area of Mungyeong province of South Korea, the body of a man with his hands and feet nailed to a wooden cross and a crown of thorns on his head was found in an abandoned stone quarry after the Easter holiday. The man was wearing only underwear, with the wound on the side of his torso and nylon strings tied around his neck, arms, and stomach. There were also 2 smaller crosses erected on each side of the cross he was nailed to, as well as having a black mirror reflecting on his dead body that was attached to the left cross. It was concluded from the autopsy that the victim was identified to be a 58-year-old taxi driver surnamed Kim, and according to the National Forensic Service, it is believed that Kim has died from suffocation caused by hanging, as well as heavy loss of blood from the side of his stomach. The police also found nails, a hammer, a manual drill, pieces of wood, and even handwritten instructions on how to build crosses with exact measurements near the scene. Unfortunately for this case, however, the South Korean forensics team have concluded that Kim has committed suicide, for there was no signs of foul play or any DNA evidence of another individual found in the scene of the crime. And you may be wondering, if this is a suicide, how is one man able to crucify himself without the help from another person? And if not, was there an accomplice that helped him with this crucifixion? Well, there's been mixed answers from all sides, but before we dive into the theories, let's first observe Kim's background and who he was. As mentioned previously, Kim was a 58-year-old taxi driver from South Korea. He was married with 1 son, and his life seemed to be on cruise control, until his son fell ill and needed a liver transplant. But unfortunately for Kim, his son passed away after a failed surgery, and his wife divorced him shortly afterwards. According to one of his friends, he said, quote, "Normally the deceased, which is Kim, was not a person who fell into religion or had bold personality, but rather, it is said that he was remembered by the people around him as a gentleman." End quote. So it's quite unusual for a person like Kim to crucify himself, knowing that he was not affiliated in any religion of some sorts. However, it was known that in this stage in his life, he was very vulnerable. The South Korean authorities were also able to trace Kim's past transactions and found that just before the incident, he sold his car, closed his bank account, canceled his mobile phone contract and home lease, and finally rented a room in Mungyeong province. This information has revealed to the investigation team that Kim has been carefully planning this crucifixion for quite some time. Now that we know a little bit of context as to who Kim was and what he has been experiencing in his life, let's now dive into the theories as to how he was crucified. The first theory is that he crucified himself without any assistance. Looking at Kim's body, there's a total of 5 wounds, 1 on each foot, 1 on his left hand, another on his right hand, and the last being on the side of his torso. While it's extremely difficult to crucify oneself, it's surprisingly quite possible. To test this theory, the South Korean investigation team actually ran a simulation of how Kim would actually achieve this crucifixion. The first step would be for him to place his right foot onto the wooden platform and nail it down, and then bend the nail using the hammer so that his left foot won't be detached. The second step would be for him to repeat the first step for his right foot, but instead, he would have to slowly squat down, lifting both his heels, while simultaneously balancing himself to not fall off the wooden platform. The third step would then to be wrap his neck onto the rope. Then moving on to the fourth step, he would have to carefully place the black mirror onto the left cross and position it where the mirror could reflect his waist accurately. Then finally, on the fifth step, this is where things can get more difficult and gruesome. Kim would have to take the manual turning drill, painfully drill holes into both his left and right hands, stab himself into his waist with a knife, and then finally slip his hands onto the nails on the cross. And if all of these steps go smoothly, then Kim would have to just let his neck hang from the upper rope and take advantage of letting his body die out due to the loss of blood and suffocation. All of these procedures seem possible, right? Well, while it's been concluded that it's possible for Kim to have done this all by himself, the South Korean investigation team have found this very improbable for one main reason. And that reason is the fact that to achieve this feat, Kim would have needed to have an immense amount of pain tolerance for this to be possible. Like mentioned previously, there were a total of 5 wounds to his body, and to have the tolerance to withstand such immense levels of pain without falling into shock is an incredibly difficult thing to achieve. Imagine yourself in this scenario. Could you, or are you able to nail both your feet to the wooden platform, manually drill holes into both your hands, and stab yourself in the waist with a knife, all while without falling into shock or lose balance from the wooden platform? Or even yet, do you have the strong conviction to do all of these things? I don't know about you, but that would be something a lot of people, including myself, would not be able to achieve on their own. Questions have also come up as to whether Kim has ingested any form of anesthetics prior to performing the crucifixion. Surely with anesthetics, Kim's pain tolerance would no longer be an issue, right? Well, the answer to that question is actually no. According to the autopsy reports, Kim's body was completely clean of any substances that reduce his sensitivity to pain, which brings up our second theory as to how this was achieved. And that theory is that Kim had one or more accomplices. Based on all of the steps that Kim has taken for his self-crucifixion, having an accomplice would definitely make the process a lot more easier and his death more probable. Sure, the pain will still be excruciating, but even if he fell into shock, Kim would still be able to get his body nailed to the cross, but with less issues. So it would seem to make more sense that at least one other person would be involved in this case. However, did the South Korean police find any suspects in this case? Well, there just happens to be just one. Introducing Suspect X is a man named Ju. Ju is a beekeeper and a long-term resident of Mungyeong. Kim Jong-gu, a man who visited Mungyeong from out of town with his son, crossed paths with Ju and asked him if he was willing to guide them to an area where the bees were harvesting honey. Ju agreed and proceeded to take them to a very remote area of the mountains where it was almost impossible to discover as an outsider. All of a sudden, while hiking up, Ju suddenly pointed to the direction of the stone quarry where Kim's body was crucified. Frightened and scared, Kim Jong-gu and his son immediately ran from the scene, leaving Ju behind, and drove off to the nearest police station where he reported this incident. The police, under Kim Jong-gun's guidance, came to the location of Kim's crucifixion shortly afterwards, but Ju was nowhere to be found. The South Korean police immediately concluded this case to be a suicide due to the lack of evidence and the instructions found in Kim's tent, but for a local television show called I Want to Know That, they've thought otherwise. I Want to Know That is a television program in South Korea that conducts their own investigation of various unsolved cases and mysteries in their country. And after hearing about the details of the crucifixion, they were quite skeptical of how Kim was able to achieve this on his own and embarked on their own investigation. They've managed to interview various people who were involved in this case, but most importantly, they were also able to track down Ju in his own neighborhood at Mungyeong. When interviewed by one of the show members, he stated, quote, "While on the way to find the place where the bees were at, I accidentally found a dead body. I was so scared. At first I thought it was a mannequin or something." End quote. Seems like a probable testimony, but this is where the investigation started to take a turn. When asked what he did for a living, Ju said that he was a beekeeper, but also mentioned that he ran a Christian website on the internet that he was rarely active on. The investigation team researched the website and found that in the forum section, Ju and Kim were recently sending messages to each other. So in other words, Ju completely lied in his interview that he didn't know who Kim was, and the fact that he was clearly active on his website when he said he wasn't. This finding immediately sparked suspicion against Ju as the primary suspect. The investigation team went back to his home for another surprise interview, but unfortunately, he was nowhere to be found. But things take another weird turn yet again. Shortly after the second visit, Ju actually closed down his Christian website and is now no longer accessible through the internet. So at the end of the day, the crucifixion of Kim is suspicious, and I mean very suspicious. It just doesn't make any sense that any man would have such a strong pain tolerance and conviction to crucify oneself on the cross without falling into shock or losing balance on the wooden platform. In my opinion, I think Kim was in a very vulnerable situation with the death of his son and his divorce. He was in a desperate need for purpose in his life and unfortunately crossed paths with Ju in the midst of all his misfortunes. Although there is no conclusive evidence to declare Ju as the accomplice to Kim's death, it seems quite probable that he coerced Kim into doing so. So, did Kim really crucify himself on the cross? If not, was Ju really the one who helped him with his crucifixion? Also, if Ju really is the culprit, where did he disappear off to? These are questions that still need answers, hence why this case is still unsolved. Hey guys and gals, this is Mr. Shin Ramen, and I just want to thank you for making it this far. Did you enjoy the video? If so, it would be greatly appreciated if you can leave a like on this video and subscribe to this channel for more future content. Till next time, stay safe and stay scared.